Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our workshop on designing for curiosity. In this session, we're going to be talking about how you can use uncertainty and autonomy support to promote engagement and learning in your classrooms. So just a general overview of this workshop. We're going to start out by talking about kind of the why of why you want your students to be curious and how you can use curiosity and autonomy to support learning. And then we'll talk about what it means to actually be curious in terms of students in your classroom. We'll talk about some design principles around having students become curious and act on that curiosity. And then we'll actually have hopefully a little bit of time to break out into groups and practice applying those principles to something that you already do or some new idea you have for a way of teaching in your classrooms. We'll end with a couple take-home points, final thoughts, and that'll be it. So thinking about curiosity and why it matters and why it's so important, there's not a lot of research on curiosity and how to promote it and how it develops, but there's quite a bit of correlational and even some longitudinal research on curiosity, starting to get some more experimental research that shows that when students are curious or when learners are curious, they have deeper levels of engagement. So they're engaging in more meaningful ways that leads to more learning and deeper learning. They put in more effort into that learning and the tasks that they're engaging in. They have more direction to their information seeking and exploration, and so those behaviors become more effective in finding the information that is needed that they don't know. And this relates to, again, their learning. And they're more motivated. So they're doing things for that kind of more intrinsic means of finding the information rather than extrinsic motivation like grades. And we know from a good amount of research that that is really important to support that intrinsic motivation. And finally, we do see a relationship between curiosity and grades, especially over time, longitudinally, in that curiosity predicts achievement in formal educational contexts. So there's a lot of kind of reasons, research-based outcomes that suggest that we should care about curiosity and getting our students to be curious. But I think that it's much more powerful to understand kind of why do we see these associations and why does it matter for students to be curious? And the way that I think about that is by starting out by saying, what does it mean to be curious? In my work, I look at curiosity as kind of a response to a knowledge gap. So students, when they recognize that there's something that they don't know, when they become motivated to want to find that information through exploration or information seeking and learning, that's what it means to be curious in my work. And we find from a good amount of research that there's this kind of optimal level of uncertainty or knowledge gap that leads people to be most curious. But in my work, what we find is that where that curve peaks, where that optimal level is, shifts from one person to another. And so when we think of someone who is more curious, we think of their peak as kind of being further along on that continuum of how much uncertainty they prefer or how much uncertainty they're comfortable with. And so these people, the really curious people, are the people who engage in information seeking and exploration most often, or they're most likely to do that when there's higher amounts of uncertainty and more to be learned. And so you can imagine that if people are more curious and they're exploring when there's more to be learned, that makes sense then that they're going to learn more, right? There's also going to be a higher risk of failure because it's harder to learn more than to learn less. It's harder to fill a larger knowledge gap than a smaller knowledge gap. But when they are successful, they're getting more information. Now, for all learners, when you are curious and you start to find information and explore because of that curiosity, think about what it is that sparked that curiosity. It was the recognition that there's something you don't know. And in order to recognize there's something you don't know, you have to think about what is it you do know? What is your existing knowledge? And when you activate that existing knowledge and then identify a gap and you fill that gap, you already have activated your mental representations that are related to that information. So when you learn it, when you get that information that you were seeking, it's going to be connected by means of that kind of metacognitive process of thinking about what you know and what you don't know. You're going to connect that to your prior knowledge. And so you're not going to have kind of this independent standalone piece of information. Now you're going to have something that contributes to a broader understanding of something. And what that means is that you're going to understand that new information in a more meaningful way that allows you to identify when is that going to be useful to you in the future? What kinds of problems is that going to be helpful for you for solving and you're going to have more connections to it through that framework it's embedded in. So you'll be better able to recall it and get that information when you need it. And so that's what we mean when we say that learning is kind of deeper when it's curiosity driven, because it's being learned in that meaningful context that has all of that kind of activated prior knowledge and connection making built in to the becoming curious aspect and the seeking information in response to that curiosity. And that's why we see that it results in deeper learning and deeper engagement. Okay, so I want to take a moment here and just kind of think about curiosity as a construct. I talked about how I operationalize it and think about it in my own scholarship and even in my classrooms, but that doesn't mean that that's the way that you might be thinking about what you want your students to look like. So I wanted to take a few minutes and we're going to put a Jamboard link in the chat and just think about what does it look like when your students are curious? What do they say? What do they do? And how do they think? And we're going to use Jamboard. That allows you to post anonymous sticky notes. And so we have sections for each of these three pieces of information about what curious students look like, and go ahead and contribute one or more sticky notes. And we'll take a break, take a few minutes for everyone to kind of think and put up some ideas, and then we'll look at those together. Okay, so that was really interesting to see what everybody thought about in terms of what curiosity looks like. Um, so moving on now, the next question is, how do we get students to do that? How do we get them to become curious? And what we did in our past work is to create a framework based on the empirical work that's existing, as well as a lot of the theoretical work on curiosity, to try to identify what are kind of the principles of promoting curiosity. What does it mean to promote curiosity, and what should work to promote curiosity? And we did this in a very iterative process of also looking at a lot of really effective videos of classroom teaching. Now, I will say we focused mostly on K-12 teaching, but I think that a lot of these principles very nicely transfer to higher education as well. So to summarize what these principles look like, this is our framework, and we don't have it broken up here, but in the chapter that's in the resources that we posted on the link earlier, and we'll post that again now, we kind of break these up into which ones promote becoming curious and which ones promote acting on that curiosity. But in general, if you want to think about how do I promote curiosity in my students, these are the general principles that we have found to be suggested by the literature. So first, just the time and space to become curious. So opportunities to think, question, participate, and explore. You can imagine that when we just were doing the Jamboard activity, that relates to kind of taking a moment to get everybody to take a step back and think about it. What does it mean to be curious? And everyone participated by adding their sticky notes, and it was in a kind of risk-free capacity. And explore, you could read other people's ideas and imagine, is that what your students look like, or why do you think your students would look different as curious learners? Another important principle is to model your own curiosity. And here I have model uncertainty reactions because remember in my work, we look at curiosity as kind of a preference for uncertainty. So more curious people prefer greater amounts of uncertainty. And in order to prefer a lot of uncertainty and you have to be comfortable with that. And so that comfort is kind of a reaction or response to uncertainty. And it's something that you have to practice and learn if you're not kind of naturally really curious, because it can be scary. It can be intimidating to let people know that you don't know something. So you don't want to look dumb, especially as an instructor. Sometimes you don't want to lose your credibility or have students think that you're not capable of doing your job. And so you got to really intentionally focus on trying to model your own curiosity. So when you don't know something, don't try to hide that. Don't try to cover. Embrace it as an opportunity for you to learn and for you to show your students that you value curiosity. So if you work out a problem that you're modeling for them and it doesn't work, don't say like, oh, ignore that. That wasn't right. Say, oh, I wonder what happened here. Something didn't go right. Let's try to figure out what it was. And anytime something's surprising, embrace that as a chance to show curiosity. Another thing that surprisingly doesn't happen that often when we've done observations of teaching is prompting question generation. And so if we want students to be curious, we need to kind of give them the space again to become curious, to show us their curiosity and tell us what they're curious about. And one way of doing this is through asking them to generate their questions. And this is where wording and language can be really important, because all teachers would say, like, oh yeah, I always ask if there are any questions. But saying, are there any questions, is very different than saying, what questions do you have? When you say, are there any questions, it often is saying what questions you already have already come up, come to your mind. And oftentimes students haven't had a chance to think of questions because they've been focused on what it is you're saying or what it is they're doing. Maybe they do have questions, but a lot of times when teachers say this question, students either don't respond, or the questions that are asked are more procedural or permission-based questions. So things like, are we supposed to use, our rulers for this? Like, are we allowed to use the internet? So more about the rules and guidance in that sense, and not about things that the students are curious about. As opposed to if you say, what questions do you have? That's asking students to stop and think, what do I want to know? And you're more likely to get responses to that prompt. Again, when I think of curiosity, it's kind of this response to a knowledge gap. And so students need not just the time and space to think about what it is they're curious about, but they need to actually engage in the metacognitive process of thinking, what do I know? So that they can identify, what do I not know? And you can help with that by just kind of reviewing, here's what we've already covered, and here's what we're going to talk about next. And giving them some time and space to think about those things, to identify the gaps in their knowledge, and also to activate that prior knowledge that those gaps are going to relate to. When students do act curious, when you see curiosity in terms of questions or new ideas or engagement, you want to provide really positive reinforcement. So, don't just answer questions, but acknowledge that you appreciate the questions being asked. What a great question. How interesting. Oh, I'm so excited that you asked that. And again, this is another chance to model your uncertainty if you don't know the answer, right? I get asked questions all the time that I don't know the answers to. And it's exciting because then that's something that I get to learn too in helping the student to find the information that they need to answer their question. I mentioned encouraging alternative ideas already. This is just, you want to keep students open-minded, and you don't want them to be thinking about always trying to find the right answer or doing things the right way. If they're curious, you want them to be thinking about all the different possible ways. And you want them to be focusing on the process of engaging and learning and figuring out, as opposed to trying to find the answer and trying to be correct or right. So encouraging alternative ideas is a way of doing that effectively. And then finally, students do need direct instruction. We do need to teach them. And so thinking about kind of how to focus on teaching students to learn and to find information to answer their questions, rather than just giving them the information, which then they'll always need somebody to give it to them, right? If they don't learn how to learn, they're always going to need somebody to teach them. But if we help them learn to learn, then they're going to be able to be autonomous learners beyond our classrooms. So just a couple of things, that you probably could figure out from those principles we talked about that do promote curiosity is what kinds of things might suppress curiosity. And I just have a couple examples here. First, again, showing that you're uncomfortable with uncertainty, or that uncertainty or mistakes are a negative thing. We don't want students to learn that, right? If they know the right answer, they're not going to learn that. They already know that. That's not an opportunity for learning. It's when they don't know the answer. It's when they don't know what to do or how to do something. That's when they're going to have the opportunity to learn. And that's when we're going to have the opportunity to learn, when we don't know something. So making sure that you're not modeling discomfort with uncertainty or avoidance of opportunities to become curious. And then, of course, discouraging information-seeking behaviors. And this is always kind of tricky with classroom management. You have to get through things. But if you think about it, would you rather teach things that you want students to know but they don't care about, or teach things that maybe are a little different than what you were planning, but that that the students really want to understand and know? And I imagine it's the latter. And so, embracing their information-seeking behaviors, their questions, their requests for, knowing new things that maybe you weren't planning to cover, but you can find a way to include, to engage them more and get that curiosity to drive the learning in your classrooms. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and break up into some groups and practice doing this, designing some activity or redesigning something that you do to implement and integrate some of these principles that we've talked about. And I know that this is tricky, so don't feel like you're going to do it right the first time. Don't feel like it's going to be easy, but the groups can work together in whatever way you find helpful. And we're here to help if you want to call us into your breakout room. I know some of you might not have experience teaching your courses yet, or might not know where to start. So if you prefer, or you might just be burned out from the end of the semester. So if you prefer, I'm also going to have a breakout room where I'll go and just share a couple of examples of things that I've redesigned in ways to promote more curiosity and how that has gone, and kind of ideas for further refining them in the future, and more explanation for why they promote curiosity and how they promote curiosity. So go ahead and go into your breakout rooms, and we look forward to seeing you in just a little bit. Okay, so I just want to thank you guys again for coming to the workshop and for engaging in the practice of trying to become curious about ways of promoting curiosity in your own teaching. And I just wanted to leave you with a few thoughts. First, curiosity is a continuum. Don't think of it as either your students are or are not curious. It really is more of a continuous thing. And the goal is to get students to experience some level of curiosity. So to find out, to be thinking of what it is that they know and don't know, and want to find out that information to fill that knowledge gap. And this is different from interest. You can't get students to all be interested in your topic, but you can kind of spark curiosity for what it is you're trying to teach them. And that involves getting them to be motivated to recognize and fill those knowledge gaps. Another take-home message, sometimes less is more. Deeper learning and deeper thinking, which comes from being curious, takes a lot of time and effort. But the outcome is that that learning lasts longer and it's more likely to transfer and be useful outside of your classroom. So, it's okay if you have to let some things go so that you can engage more deeply in other things. Autonomy is a really powerful way of shifting the focus from what you want to teach students to what they want to learn. And so I think it's a really great tool to use in order to figure out ways of promoting curiosity. Think about, where can I put more autonomy into my coursework so the students feel a sense of ownership of their learning, and the shift is away from me teaching to them learning. And finally, it's okay to be uncomfortable with this question of how to promote curiosity, and you probably won't get it right the first time. I never do. I still have a lot of room for improvement and a lot of room for growth. But that's exciting, because if I already knew how to do it, I wouldn't get to learn more things, and I wouldn't get to grow and develop my pedagogy. So I'm going to end there, and I want to say thank you to all of you for attending, and of course thank you to my collaborators in this work, Sharon Sembrin and Geneva Tiello, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions, but you should feel free to contact any of us if you want to chat anymore. And remember, we put a book chapter that we have on this work in the Google Drive folder that we've shared, so feel free to go there for more information as well. Thanks so much for coming.